Hi, and welcome back to David Pattinson's Accused Friends podcast format. I wanted to talk today about the tyranny of big tech, but before I do, I wanted to make a special mention about Captain Tom who died this week, and this has obviously been in the news. I made a video last year about Captain Tom, talking about how he's been exploited by big government and by the media, not for so much his war hero status or his genteel demeanour, but because he raised 30 million for the NHS. And I made the point that had he raised 30 million for private medicine, there would have been no lauding, there would have been no knighthood, there would have been no, front page of the newspaper, hero worshipping of Captain Tom. It was the fact that he was a champion for the NHS that resulted in his sort of exalted status. And people say, well, David is free to like the NHS or fundraise for the NHS, and I'd agree with that 100%. I merely pointed out that had he been promoting expanded supply of healthcare services via the private sector, there would have been no news crews outside his house, no BBC, no Sky News, no meeting with the Queen, no anything, no clapathon. It was simply as a result of his supporting of the NHS, and in the NHS media and marketing teams have exploited this story. They've exploited Captain Tom, in my opinion, and the news of his death. Obviously, he's had a long life and all that sort of thing. I just think brings it all home. I don't think it's appropriate for the media to exploit senior citizens in the way that they have so brazenly here. And I kind of think it's kind of a sad story, but it highlights for me this double standard between NHS and private medicine. The whole purpose really of the lockdown and of the pandemic hype has been to create a sort of a monopoly position for the NHS, a sort of one-size-fits-all healthcare service monitored by the government, run centrally planned by the government, and to have the freedom and the liberties of British citizens be dependent upon that bureaucracy. And the Captain Tom story obviously feeds into that. If anyone thinks that I'm making this up, I want you to go outside right now, walk around your garden, try to raise money for private medicine as a result of them having to shut their practices during the lockdown, and see how quickly the Sky News cameras and the BBC cameras show up at your house. I get the feeling you'll be walking around the garden for a very long time. Moving on then, another pet peeve of mine that I've noticed that I suppose feeds into all this sort of lockdown tyranny has been the Premier League and their sort of fight against racism, which all kind of kicked off last year with the Black Lives Matter, and they were talking about renaming it the Black Lives Matter Premier League, and everyone had Black Lives Matter on the shirts. And the Sky Sports pundit team, you might remember last season, I did a couple of videos on this. They were talking about fans committing racist abuses in the during the games, and how they needed to be banned for life. But I pointed out the double standard with players who commit or perceive racist actions. They do not get banned for life. They just get banned for a few games, and it's a total double standard. But obviously this season, with the fact that the fans aren't in the stadiums to commit racist offences, the Premier League has moved on to racism against players on social media. And you might have seen Manchester United manager Solskjaer was out there saying, we need to, the social media companies need to step up and, regulate the free speech of fans, because, we don't want racism. And Sam Allardyce, echoed the same point. I don't know if any Premier League managers have any independent thought on this issue, or if they're sort of told what to say. I mean, I remember the days where the half-time punditry was a 100% guarantee of actually talking about the first half of the match. Now it's a 50-50 probability about either talking about the first half of the match or talking about racism. And I was speaking to a guy the other day back in Britain on the phone, and he was saying, David, this is what makes Britain a great country, that we stand up to racism, that we don't tolerate racism, that we call racism out when we find it. This is what makes us great. And I said, yeah, well, that's fair enough. I got no problem with that. But what about the exploitation of race as a political tool? What about the exploitation of race to divide society against itself? Is that what makes us great? And he said, well, no, obviously that's not what makes us great, and we don't call that out. We actually encourage it. We foment it. It's led and driven by the government. It's led and driven by Sky Sports. This constant race baiting and divisiveness and the politicization of race, championed by Marcus Rashford primarily as the poster child of this. Excuse me, but why don't we call this out? If racism's bad, why is race baiting not also bad? Why is the exploitation of race not bad? Why is it that we can just use race to divide people, to shut down their free speech, and no one really has anything to say about it? And I think it's time maybe some of these Premier League managers come out and say, we're here to talk about football. Let's give the race issue a break and stop, dividing fans, against each other and trying to shut down their free speech. I mean, it used to be that Premier League just wanted your money. Now they want your money and your free speech. So I think that's a sort of sad state of affairs, something that's going to kind of run and run. Another story that's been in the news, something I take a big interest in, is these people, the influencers that have been out in Dubai. They've been out there, sitting by the pool and taking photos and doing the Instagram influencing work. And there's been a sort of debate about whether it's key work, and they have decided to shut down the flights from Dubai. So these people either have to come back or stay out there. And my argument on this, and I followed this with interest, and I suppose I'm one of these people, I left Great Britain because I didn't want to be locked down in Great Britain. I didn't want to be obligated to be protecting the NHS every day. I didn't want my freedom to be dependent on the healthcare of other people. And moved over here to Florida, where it's a no lockdown state, and just living a normal life in the sunshine. And obviously a lot of other people have got the same idea. The influencers going out there to Dubai. And of course the government, instead of saying all these people are great people, they're protecting the NHS, they're no longer spreading the virus in the UK because they're not physically there, they come out and criticize these people. And of course, the reason they're criticising them is because it undermines the British lockdown. How can you justify a global pandemic that everyone needs to cower in fear from if you've got all the influencers sitting out there by the pool, drinking the martinis, topping up the suntan in big groups, and there's no one dying, there's no one getting ill. So it undermines the lockdown, which is why it's been so aggressively shamed by the government, by the media, and yet no one talks about the other side of the issue. These people are outside the UK. They are not putting any threat on the NHS in any way because they're not in the country. They're not spreading the virus in the country. They are not doing anything in the country because they're not in the country. So, if they want to influence people to leave the country and, enjoy British civil liberties elsewhere, what is wrong with that? Why don't we start pushing that message out there? Let's get people who don't wish to be locked down to leave Great Britain, because there's lots of other parts of the world where civil liberties are not being impeded anywhere near to the extent they are in Great Britain, where people can earn a living, where people can socialise, where people can, live a normal life and make their own risk assessment about their health. Doesn't have to be done by the government. Going on to the technology debate, something I've been thinking about with, the tyranny of big tech. I mean, I've been speaking out about the fact that we have technology companies in Britain that are not British companies; they're American companies. Now, I was listening to the radio in the car here in Florida just a couple of days ago, and the senator for Florida, his name is Marco Rubio. Some people in Britain may or may not know him, but he's somewhat prominent figure. And he was talking about how, in America, we do not want these Chinese tech companies, infiltrating iPhones and social media and the internet, because they're stealing American citizens' private information. I mean, what he didn't say was that there's no problem with American companies stealing American citizens' private information. We just don't want the Chinese doing it. And of course, this, when you think about this in a British context, I mean, it's the same argument, isn't it? Why is it okay for American companies to come in and steal British citizens' private information, to be a filter on free speech and communication in Great Britain? Why can't we have British companies doing this and obeying British laws, and British profits remaining in Great Britain? Why do we have to have American companies doing this, or why does the government allow it? I mean, the reason the government allows it is because it benefits them. These tech companies share private data with the government, and so it is, government spying, outsourced government spying. It's government spying by the private sector to just hand over the privacy information, the private data to the government that can be then weaponized against the people. And, that's the sort of symbiotic relationship between big government and big tech that we need to stand against. And it got me thinking about, when are we going to have a debate about the costs and benefits of technology in our lives? Obviously, over the last 25 years, the internet has grown and grown, social media has grown and grown, and it's becoming a bigger and bigger part of everyone's life. Everyone's now going to be tracked and traced and followed, and everything recorded about their movements. But what about the cost to society? Obviously there are benefits to technology. I'm using technology right now to speak to you. That's a good thing. But what about the downsides? What about the cost to society, the division in society, the loss of civil liberties? When can we have an honest debate about whether these things are good or bad for Great Britain, for the British people? And, I think that's something that needs to be addressed. We seem to be not very good in Great Britain about having these honest debates about these big issues. There's been no debate about the merits and the costs of immigration into our country that's been on a massive scale for about the last 60 years. Very little debate about the lockdown, whether the lockdown's a good thing for Great Britain. There was obviously a big debate about the EU integration by stealth, which culminated in the Brexit. But obviously the government put off that debate for as long as they possibly could. And it's like all these things, we have these issues that benefit big government, and big government doesn't want to have any dissent, anyone saying, well, this may benefit big government, but how does it benefit the British people, or to what extent does it not benefit the British people? I've been thinking a bit more about some of these big cultural stories that are fomented by the media. I talked at the beginning about Black Lives Matter, and of course that all kicked off with the George Floyd killing or death in Minneapolis. But of course Minneapolis is a town in the American Midwest near the Canadian border. It is at least 5,000 miles from Great Britain. So what does something in Minneapolis have to do with Great Britain? I would argue pretty much nothing, but it's portrayed in the media as if it's, happening down the street from you, happening in Coventry, happening in Hartlepool, happening in Hull, happening in Leeds, happening in Derby. And of course it isn't. It's nothing to do with all these towns. Same thing with the Harvey Weinstein, which I talked about. Women having sexual relations with Harvey Weinstein in Hollywood to secure a $10 million movie deal may or may not be good in Hollywood, but what's it got to do with people in Bournemouth? What's it got to do with people in Southampton, in Plymouth, in Cardiff? Where women are, getting involved in jobs where they're getting paid maybe $20,000 a year or $30,000 a year or $40,000 a year. The sexual incentive to sleep with the hiring manager, I would say, is different when you're talking about a $20,000 a year job compared to a $10 million movie deal or a $15 million movie deal. So obviously those kind of things are never discussed. It's just thrown out there across Great Britain. And, again, it's the tyranny of big tech. Where's the British government saying, these issues are nothing to do with Great Britain? Why do we have to be subjected to all this propaganda? Just like Captain Tom, it props up the government, strengthens the government, reduces the freedom of British citizens, reduces the liberty of British citizens, and it's an issue of certain stories being promoted and other stories being suppressed. I want to see it like a marketplace of ideas, a competitive environment of ideas where all ideas can be discussed and debated freely without censorship, without suppression, without race baiting, and the best ideas can flow to the top. But obviously big government, they don't want that. And, that's the sort of state of affairs we find ourselves in. I want to end this podcast with, I suppose, a few predictions about the future of lockdown. We're currently in lockdown 3 in Great Britain. Some people call that lockdown infinity. And it's one of these long lockdowns. It's like, we don't know when it's going to end. It might be Easter, it might be the summer, it might be whenever. And there's a lot of disillusionment in Britain about this. I'm still encouraging people to leave the country. You can always return if lockdown gets lifted, or if you want to return to lockdown. If you live in a free country, like I said, you're always welcome to lock yourself down. I've got absolutely no problem with that. It's the coerced nature of lockdown, and I suppose it's tough for me to really predict at this point where it'll end, if it'll end, how it'll end. I suspect it'll continue in different degrees for the foreseeable future, because we need the lockdown to cover up the impending sovereign debt crisis that Britain's going to endure as a result of the collapse of the US dollar, with the pound tied to the dollar, as the dollar is the reserve currency of the world. Britain's debt situation is extremely bad. This crisis only makes it worse. And I sense that the government, in some degree or other, is looking to worsen our debt situation as quickly as possible so we can have a new currency, so we can get back onto the gold standard. But of course, rather than be blamed for total blatant financial mismanagement over a very long period, they want to use the guise of the coronavirus as to deflect attention away from their own mismanagement, from their own greed, from their own exploitation of the British people to enrich themselves, for the massive generational wealth transfer from young people to old people. And that's kind of what we've done as a country. We've normalized generational theft. We've said, hey, people in 2040 or 2050 won't mind paying all the bills for us now, so we can be locked down and receive welfare and furlough. Rishi, I think, was saying that people in 2060 and 2070, they won't even mind either. But why don't we ask these people? Why don't we wait for them to be born before we ask them if they want all their money stolen from them or put into debt slavery before before they're old enough to vote, before they're old enough to be born? Why don't we just spend the money we have now? And if we haven't got enough money, then obviously we can't afford the lockdown, can we? But I don't know where the lockdown's going. I'm keeping a keen eye on it, and obviously the debt crisis is going to worsen. It's going to worsen quickly, and that's going to lead to more and more of this social disunity that is being promoted, or being hidden rather, by these issues of race and other media distractions, global warming, of course, that are used to distract the people from what's really going on. And that's I guess the conclusion about big tech. It's a censoring tool, it's a distraction tool, when really, to have a happy, healthy life, the British people need accurate information. And that's kind of what we need to get back to as a country. So I hope you like this podcast. Please subscribe to the channel, and we'll talk to you soon.